Hello, everybody, and welcome to this LinkedIn Live stroke Be Brilliant People podcast live this afternoon. So, thank you for everyone that's kind of joining us live. Hopefully, we'll be able to kind of see your questions coming in as they come in. I've had a few problems with doing LinkedIn Lives with this in the past. But if we can't get your questions on live, I'm sure either me or Kelly will be happy to pick those up at another point as well. If you kind of post them in the comments, and we'll kind of try to pick those up as well as I try to flip between kind of LinkedIn and LinkedIn Live, the wonders of technology. But listen, without further ado, I'm really pleased to welcome this afternoon's guests to the podcast and this LinkedIn Live today. And it's Kelly Swingler, who's the burnt outologist. Did I say that right, Kelly?
Not quite, almost. Burnoutologist.
Burnoutologist. There you go. My strength is not in kind of words, I don't think, but it's an absolute pleasure to have Kelly on the podcast and LinkedIn Live this afternoon, and we're going to kind of jump into what all that actually means as well in this podcast this afternoon. And Kelly will be able to kind of talk to us all about that and talk to us hopefully a little bit about kind of her journey with burnout and what that means, what that looks like. Also, kind of, how do we talk about burnout in an organizational context and the workplace, because it's a really important issue as well. And hopefully we'll get into also talking and bringing in together neurodiversity and burnout in this conversation as well, because I think it's a really important topic of conversation to bring in as well. So without further ado, let me introduce Kelly Swingler to you all this afternoon. Some of you may know, some of you may not, but over to you, Kelly. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, how long have we got? Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited to kind of see where this afternoon's conversation takes us. So my name's Kelly Swingler. I am the burnoutologist. I'm an ex-HRD, kind of high-performing, high-achieving, over-performing, recovering perfectionist, all of that really good stuff that I'm sure probably many of us can relate to, actually. I spent kind of 15 years in corporate HR, and I had, I'd always been kind of seen as a bit of a rebel and a rule breaker. 2002 kind of started to really focus on individualism in the workplace. 2008, I scrapped annual performance appraisals. 2010 started kind of burning the handbook and making sure that people were put before policies. And then I was headhunted for an HRD role, organisation of 4,000 in London. And that organisation, and I'm sure many of us have kind of do the in-house stuff, right? When we go into roles that look like they're just going to be really easy, if we kind of get presented with a really easy role, most of us turn it down, because actually we want the toxic, difficult job, right? The one that's going to provide us with the challenge and hopefully give us the most reward. And so I was headhunted for that role, and it was far more toxic than I ever imagined. Like day one, my gut was screaming at me to get out. 6 months later, my gut was still screaming at me to get out. And 2.5 years later, I found myself kind of living with what I didn't know at the time, but started kind of living with severe pain as a result of my first burnout. And January 2013 through to July 2013, so kind of 7 months of constant hospital admittances, like excruciating pain, not being able to stand up, not being able to kind of, just not being able to move, but still being able to work, right? Because I could still type on my laptop, I could still get on the phone, I could still do lots of stuff. So in the 7 months that I was being admitted in and out of hospital, I never missed a day of work. I was, Zooming in, and not that it was Zoom necessarily at the time, but kind of Skyping in, or all sorts of WebEx type kind of calls and conference calls and all of that stuff back then, to ensure that I never missed anything. And July 2013, I ended up having 2 operations in 48 hours for 2 severe chronic health conditions that I still live with to this day. And I think now as a result of my burnout, kind of 11 years later, I live with 3 chronic health conditions. I've also been I suppose diagnosed, confirmed, whatever it is that you want to call it, with I suppose some additional challenges, some additional stuff that again I kind of have to live with on a daily basis. And so really kind of for the last 11 years, my focus has been on ensuring that nobody else has to experience what I did as a result of burnout. Left corporate, didn't think I'd be doing anything in this space. Left corporate to start my own consultancy. Was running a really successful people and change consultancy, right? Winning awards, making tons of money, working with amazing clients. And then I received a phone call to tell me that my replacement had actually died in her sleep whilst away on a leadership residential. And 2 days later, I received another phone call that basically told me that I'd been the 4th HRD to become really seriously ill as a result of that organisation. I reached out to the CIPD really to try and understand what the CIPD were doing to help HR directors like myself, right? What were they going to do? What were they doing to help us become seriously ill, to stop us dying as a result of our jobs when seemingly we'd be quite healthy? And their response was contact your EAP, so your employee assistance provider.
Okay.
And for me, that just was not good enough. So that kind of became my quest. So in addition to like my psychology degree, my coaching qualifications, my HR qualifications, my training qualifications, that kind of really began, I suppose, my quest to understand this thing called stress and workplace stress and try to get to the bottom of this thing called burnout. And so I've studied and qualified in a number of kind of whole other kind of suite of different coaching tools, and hypnotherapy and psychotherapy and yoga and energy work and anatomy and physiology and empowerment techniques and glass walking and fire walking and emotional intelligence, just a hot like neuroscience, just to kind of join as many dots as possible, right? Because I think from a psychology perspective, I could almost kind of understand it. From a psychotherapy perspective, I could almost understand it. But actually burnout impacts our entire life. It can impact our brain and our body in the same way as trauma. But actually, like, what is it? What causes that connection? Why am I living with the, kind of 3 chronic health conditions as a result of seemingly stress at work, right? Why am I living with 3 health conditions that were created with that? Why are people dying as a result of burnout, right? Why are they having strokes and heart attacks, and why is it impacting their confidence? So really, I was called an analytical thinker a few months ago and kind of told that I was quite a lot of science and quite a lot of woo, because I think I've kind of got that all of combined. But I think for me, like, I'm just, as far as I'm concerned, right, I'm just a dot joiner. I've always that kind of level of curiosity with me. I just want to keep on joining the dots, understanding what leads to burnout, understanding what happens when we're in burnout, and kind of understanding what happens afterwards. So I have joined and continue to join like hundreds of dots really from a number of different fields and a number of different kind of schools of science and schools of woo and all of that stuff. And as of today, like, I coach in terms of burnout recovery. I run the Burnout Academy, so I train coaches and in-house pros in burnout awareness and kind of how to run their own burnout awareness training. And I will soon be delivering kind of executive burnout coaching training and qualifications. And in addition to the Burnout Academy, I also run the Burnout Club. So that is kind of affordable, accessible coaching and resources for anybody who is kind of feeling stressed or overwhelmed, who wants to either prevent and or recover from burnout in the most accessible way. So that's me in as quick as I can kind of do it, really.
You did really well. Thank you. So much there to kind of unpack, I think, there as well, isn't there, and to talk about. I'm really curious, because we often say, don't we, nothing motivates like impact. I wonder then kind of what is your mission in terms of the impact that you want to make?
I just want to banish burnout. I know it's preventable. I know that we can change it. I suppose my kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning, I think, for kind of the 11 years that I've now been doing this work, I think, like, I suppose, created this burnout equation. And the burnout equation is toxicity minus our sense of self equals burnout. And I think, like, we can all work in toxic environments. We can all be in toxic relationships. We can all be in toxic situations. And many of us can come through those completely unscathed and completely unharmed. And some of us continue to live with the consequences for months and sometimes years and sometimes forever. But I do think it's our sense of self. And I've just been on a live with Mirto Lagaki, who I met in Greece when I was over there doing a talk last year. And like for us, the kind of sense of self piece, right, is really driven by our sense of awareness. And I think if ever we feel that we have to mask or shrink or hide, or we don't feel that we can be psychologically safe enough to like present as ourselves and live as our best self, if we do not have that level of self-awareness, if we are, you know, leading from frameworks and tick boxes instead of leading from our core self or living from our core self, it's absolutely that loss of sense of self. So I think in everything that I do, everything starts with the who, right? I think Simon Sinek starts very much with the why, and everything that I do starts with the who, right? Who are you? You know, your values, your strengths, your drivers. I think if we can get people back to that place, understanding that losing ourselves is what is causing burnout fundamentally. There are many contributing factors, but it is our loss of sense of self. And so for me, I want to banish burnout, but I want to do so with solving the burnout equation. Because again, I think if we look at toxic workplaces, I think many toxic workplaces are actually being created because many of the leaders and people that in it do not have that sense of self, right? They don't know who they are. And I think if we all understood who we were at our core, not only would that, you know, stop us getting to the point of burnout, but hopefully it would stop us being in toxic workplaces and environments in the first place. So that's my kind of driver. So banishing burnout through solving the burnout equation.
Yeah, it sounds like what I'm hearing is that kind of almost it becoming like a self-fulfilling prophecy by creating the environments that allow burnout to happen, right?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
We're all responsible for burnout prevention.
We've got a
you know,
question.
it can come from it can be workplaces, it can be individuals, it can be leaders, it can be managers, but every single one of us is responsible for burnout prevention.
Yeah, no, I'd like to unpack that a bit more with you as well at some point. But before we do, the LinkedIn Live is working, clearly, because we've got a question coming in from David Bedford. No relation to me, but I know David. But that was an interesting conversation when we first hooked up. What's the school of woo? Sorry, I might have missed an earlier mention or never come by this term before.
Yeah, so I think so for me, I think a lot of again of what I do is kind of very intuitive, very holistic, so very much kind of focused on the person. I think lots of people that want, you know, kind of hard data, hard facts, and I suppose if I look at it from a scientific perspective, those that kind of don't necessarily, I suppose, align to or believe in the kind of intuitive, holistic, and holistic basically just means whole, right? Holistic is whole person. But I think sometimes when I talk about the holistic stuff, some people see that as being a bit too woo, as in, you know, kind of a bit too hippie, a bit too out there, not something that is necessarily tangible. So I think that, you know, I just get called, you know, kind of a little bit of science and a little bit of woo. So that's that kind of there, because I definitely believe in like this whole person kind of holistic approach.
And David's on it this afternoon because he's come back straight away with another one. He says toxic workplaces promote the bad behavior, bullies, etc. I found the best thing to do is walk away, but not everyone can do that. Interesting. What are your thoughts on that, Kelly?
Yeah, and again, I mean, I would love to say that, but again, I think it depends on the driving factors. So, as I said, I think for some of us, we go into workplace. Like I went into the organization ultimately that contributed to my burnout, knowing that it was a toxic workplace, and it was kind of sold to me as like, you can turn this around. And I think from a career perspective, right, it was the HRD. If I could have been able to turn that organization, and I don't mean single-handedly, but change the culture within that organization, for me that would have ultimately like been the biggest, you know, kind of tick box in my career, right? And I genuinely thought I would be a corporate lifer. Never ever thought I would be leaving or doing any of that. So I think some of us go into organizations knowing that it is toxic because we want to fix it. I also think for some of us, it's that kind of boiling frog analogy, right? Some of us go into organizations not necessarily knowing that it's toxic, because sometimes it is something that kind of simmers slowly around us, and then we just start to think this is the way that it's happening. We don't necessarily notice it. I also think not everybody within a toxic workplace sees it as a toxic workplace. some of my team that were not working directly with the executive team would have said it was one of the best companies to work for. But I was protecting them and shielding them from a lot of that. And some of the people on the front line that were doing the kind of frontline roles would not have seen it as a toxic workplace. A lot of people did,
sure.
but not everybody. And I think there's kind of different experiences that we have.
It's a line of sight, right?
Totally. And I also want to say that actually in that toxicity, like the closer that we get to burnout, the less likely we are to recognize that we need to leave those workplaces, or we need to leave those situations, or we need to fix something. The closer that we get to burnout, and like from a neuroscience perspective, we actually move from the intellectual part of our brain, where we can be creative and problem focused and solution focused and, you know, innovative. We move from that part of our brain into the primitive part of our brain. We're just in fight or flight mode, and we just feel like we've got to keep going, got to keep moving, got to keep pushing, right? It's a fight for survival. And that means just keep going, right? Don't let anybody see that you're failing or falling or struggling or any of that kind of stuff. So the closer that we get to burnout, the less likely we are to be able to stop, think creatively, think I just need to get out of here. Because actually the brain is changing in such a way, the brain is getting us into that constant fight or flight. We're constantly creating some of those different stress hormones, and we're just in it. So we wouldn't even think, like, if we think about it like way before we get there, of course we'd want to walk away, right? We want to go somewhere where we would be loved and appreciated and valued and all of that stuff. But the closer we get to burnout, leaving is just not an option, because our brain does not allow us to actually think about that as a solution.
That sounds like quite a vicious cycle, doesn't it?
It is, and it's huge. You know, some people can literally like stay in a habitual burnout cycle for years. So the World Health Organization have defined burnout as this kind of workplace phenomenon. A year after that definition, burnout isn't new, right? Burnout's been around since the 70s. But a year after that kind of World Health Organization was published, there was actually a 3-year research project that had been created, and it actually created what's called the BAT, the Burnout Assessment Tool. And that tool actually demonstrated that burnout can happen to anybody. We don't just need to be in the workplace. And I think for any of us that have lived and experienced burnout, the World Health Organization definition really is not worth the paper or the screen that it's written on, because it doesn't really talk about it. It doesn't focus on the severity. It's just basically, you know, it's a workplace phenomenon. You'll just feel a bit stressed, right? You might start to perform a little bit less. It's so much more than that, and it can cut so much more deeply than that. And like, I think some of it like that needs to be the starting point. But many of us, so from my experience and the kind of 11 years now that I've been doing this work, we kind of look at stress on like a 10-point scale, right? 0 being the kind of lowest, 10 being the highest. 9 and 10 on that scale, we're looking at kind of chronic stress. And we can stay in that chronic stress cycle for a really, really long time. But actually burnout, for me, all of the work that I've done over the years on this is like, burnout is what happens when you fall off that scale, right? It's the kind of point in which it becomes so debilitating and so challenging, and like you can't function, you can't think, you're in a frozen mode, right? You're literally in that. Yeah, and you're kind of in that fight for survival. But many people, and the longer that we stay in that kind of full end, like top end of that scale, right? So if we kind of look 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the longer that we stay there, actually like our scale reduces. So all of us have, say, got a scale of 0 to 10. But the longer we spend at this end of the scale, actually, we then don't necessarily come back down to 0, right? Our baseline might be 6 instead of 0. And we keep thinking that we're there. So some people will stay in that habitual burnout cycle, kind of, 7, 8, 9, 10 for years, and they'll never have that fundamental crash at the end. But they go to 10, they might come down to 6. They'll go to 10, they might come down to 7. They'll go to 10, they might come back down to 8. But it's actually it's called our holostatic load. And it basically then is where our kind of scale starts here. Our scale begins to shrink the longer that we stay in that chronic stress state. And that can go on for years and years and years. And we just begin to think then that everything is normal. And it's only really when we get that crash at the end that then we realize that something needs to change, and that
The
can
impact.
be, and that can be like really severe for lots of people, but it can take us absolutely years to get to that point.
Yeah, no, sure. And listening to you, and a lot of what you're talking about there is in that kind of like that corporate space, right? What about for individuals like us then, that are kind of self-employed, where there's not always kind of a system in place even to support you, maybe when you're on your own, literally, and you're constantly kind of like pushing the boundaries. What can you do there as a kind of a self-employed person then, that kind of might be experiencing some of the early signs of burnout?
I think again, right, we've got to come back to like, who are we? So I think a lot of people, not everybody, and if I think back to it, like, I didn't start my own consultancy because I reached burnout in 2013. I started my own consultancy because I recognized that I was in a toxic environment. I began to look for other roles and they all looked pretty similar. And I just thought, I don't want to be in this space anymore. But a lot of people, we're definitely seeing this rise kind of over the last 5 years. A lot of people that are now starting their own businesses are doing so as a result of burning out in the workplace, right? They've reached burnout. They then can't do this. They haven't necessarily got the level of support to get them through what that burnout is and what that looks like. They don't feel confident enough to then go and get another job elsewhere. So they're then thinking, I'll start my own business, right? Because lots of people make it look really easy. And for those of us that are in it, we know that building our own business, creating our own business, building a sustainable business, and I say this again, kind of 11 years later now, it's not easy, right? It can be really hard. And I've given, a number of talks and workshops, and I've worked with one-to-one and worked with groups of coaches of kind of business owners and entrepreneurs and corporate leaders and all sorts over the last few years. I think it's the same premise. We have to know who we are and we have to know why we're doing it. If we feel that we are, pushing ourselves to the limit, ultimately, if we are going to push ourselves to breaking point, we have no business. We cannot continue if we're constantly running on empty. We have to be putting in that rest time, that downtime, that creative time, that thinking time. And that's the same wherever we're working. But we have to recognize, whilst we can do everything, we can achieve anything, right? But we cannot do everything. And we need to make some decisions about what we want it to look like. I've spoken and worked with some business owners who have grown multi-million-pound organizations and have reached the point of burnout. And with some of them, I've coached them to help them through that burnout. And I know of one person, didn't work with her specifically, but I've had a conversation with one person who sold her business for well over £1 billion to a large global brand. And she reached burnout just before she got to that point. And from her perspective, and with many of the business owners that I've worked with that have got kind of that multi-million, or even those that are kind of 6 figures and below, none of them would ever want to experience burnout again, regardless of how much money the business was making as a result of it. They just would not push themselves to that limit. I think many of us assume that we are immune to it, right? Burnout is this thing that happens over there, right? It happens to those people because I am a high performer. I'm a high achiever. I'm resilient. I look after myself. I do all stuff. So burnout's never going to get me. However, any kind of toxicity, right? Whether that's toxic working hours, toxic clients, toxic relationships, toxic situations, toxic environment,
self-toxicity,
totally, minus our sense of self, right? If we're losing ourselves along the way, if we are ignoring our intuition, if we're ignoring our gut feel, if we're working against our values, if we're working in a way, where our behaviors are not sustainable, our habits are not sustainable, our thoughts are not sustainable, any kind of toxicity minus our sense of self will lead to burnout. So we can do that as business owners, whether we're employed, whether we're running, a hobby business, whether we're running a lifestyle business, whether we're, wanting to create a kind of multi-billion pound empire, right? Every single one of us, if we lose ourselves along the way and we are creating or working in a toxic environment, or we're having toxic thoughts or any of that kind of stuff, we will get to the point of burnout.
Yeah. Before I go into my question that I've got for you, there's another question come up in the chat, and that's from David again. He says,
Okay.
it's quite exhausting to go through the whole reset of 10 back down to 0 and reset the scale again. It needs the time to heal as well, which obviously means money, support, self-care, lots of factors.
I mean, we definitely need the time to heal. I would absolutely say that. But the key really is not to get us to that point of 10 in the first place, right? Prevention is absolutely better than cure. And so I think, like, it doesn't have to take a lot of money. It can do. It can, sometimes you are having to walk away from jobs. Sometimes you're having to walk away from business. Sometimes you are needing time off work with limited sick pay or no sick pay, or you might have run out of sick pay. Of course, it can have a factor on all of those things. But absolutely, the key, when we talk chronic stress, we talk really, really severe high levels of stress that have been going on for a really, really long period of time. Like, we do not have to get to the point of 10. Now, I'm also gonna say here that I don't think any of us should be living at the point of 0. We all need stress. We all need an element of stress. We need stress to get us out of bed in the morning. We need stress to help us achieve goals. We need stress to, get us across the finish line, or for learning or training or any of that stuff. We all need an element of stress. We might not call it stress. We might call it drive. We might call it passion. We might call it adrenaline. But we all need an element of stress. But I think if we can keep and maintain our own stress levels at the lower half of that scale, that's where we, create sustainability, right? That's where we are happy, healthy, high-performing humans. If we look at, and I know in business, right, we love a sporting analogy, right? We love a sporting analogy in business. Every top performing athlete, sports person, whoever in the world, every single one of them will be, as part of their training plan, putting in recovery as part of that. And I think that's the bit that so many of us miss, right? We think we have to be going 24/7, 12 months of the year. We've just got to keep pushing, right? We need to fight for more. We've got to be even more high performing. But none of us allow the rest time. We don't allow that thinking time. We don't allow that creative time. We don't allow ourselves any of that space. And without that, that is what's causing some of the problems, right? If we want sustainable high performance, and we want to stop us getting to that point of 10, which is that chronic, right? So really, really high levels of stress over really long periods of time, we have to get used to building in that downtime. And that is what allows us to maintain, right? To keep performing in a sustainable way. But we've got to, I think, stop thinking. I think this is very, very kind of old school thinking that every single one of us can perform 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That's not sustainable high performance. There needs to be the downtime every day, every week, every month, every year, to allow us to reset, to recharge, to refocus. That's where we kind of create that sustainability.
Just listening to yourself, I'm kind of reflecting on my own, I guess, self-toxicity in terms of being a self-employed business owner, and the pressure that I put on myself to kind of just consistently perform and do and work all the time, 7 days a week, and manage a busy family life. I'm neurodivergent. I've got a neurodivergent family. I've got lots of additional things going on as well, but that pressure just to consistently go. And the importance, I'm self-aware enough to know, but I don't always put it into place. The importance of kind of setting those healthy boundaries with yourself, I think, is kind of what I'm hearing here, and the importance of doing that. And if by not doing that, and I've felt it, Kelly, I've felt it many times. I've felt the kind of, it feels like a crushing pressure on your head, and it just feels like I'm becoming paralyzed. And I feel it, and I know it's happening, and I almost leave it to the point of that kind of seeing that cliff edge to actually do something about it. That's not healthy either, right? I could do some trade-offs that could be happening here. I could still perform, and in fact, probably perform better if I'm a bit more kinder to myself and give myself that time out and that space. And actually, instead of just putting it in the diary and not making it happen, actually live it and make it happen. Listen, I'm a coach, and I'm going to be absolutely honest about this. You know, I coach people about kind of setting healthy boundaries and stuff like that, and then not do it myself. Right?
Yeah, you're not the only one, Mike. You're not the only one.
You know what? It's about actually swallowing my own medicine, I think, here as well, is what I'm hearing from you as well. So actually, just actually knowing this isn't just enough, right? You actually have to be able to be prepared to do something about it and actually put those trade-offs in place and protect that time for yourself. Protect that time for yourself so you don't get to that cliff edge and fall off it. Because let me tell you, as someone who's kind of been there and kind of gone over the edge and who has suffered with really poor mental health and depression as well, with burnout, no doubt, underlying and triggering that as well, I can tell you, it's as you've perfectly illustrated when we first started this conversation, it's not a place that you want to go, and it's a difficult place to climb back out from as well. So, you know, I don't mind sharing that, because I just feel like, you know, it's important to kind of really have this open conversation about burnout, because it's so clearly linked to people's well-being and people's mental health as well, right? You know, so it's like, so it's like it can become quite you know, kind of being a bit woo, makes it kind of a bit taboo, and we don't want to talk about that because it's all a bit like airy fairy kind of nonsense and stuff like that. But actually, it's like almost we know that not talking about things like well-being and mental health has an adverse effect on people, can lead to increased death rates, increased suicide rates, and so on and so forth. So we must talk about this. We must be open about it, and we must be open about our own, you know, flaws, our own internalized toxicity towards ourselves, I think, as well. It's kind of what you're stoking up in me here, Kelly, while I'm talking to you.
No, but again, I think you've made a really good point there. So, you know, I went through my first burnout 2013. So my first burnout really made me seriously ill, right? That was ultimately what caused the conditions that I live with now. 2 years later, I experienced burnout again, and really it was for that reason. I had spent 2 years learning everything, right? The theory of it all, right? Whether we're coaches, whether we're employees, whether we're leaders, whether we're individuals, we all know the theory, right? And in order to be healthy, right, we're supposed to prioritize our sleep, eat nutritious and healthy foods, drink plenty of water, get outside every day, right? So we know in theory the things that we should be doing. We know in practice the things that we should be doing. And I had spent 2 years learning, you know, I was doing like multiple qualifications at the same time. I was studying all this stuff because I really, really wanted to know about it. But I wasn't living anything. I wasn't living the difference in like for all of the stuff that I was doing. I was coaching other people on it, right? This is what you need to do. This is how we need to do it. I was, you know, running programs and, you know, training people on it. I was doing all this stuff, but I wasn't actually living any of it myself. And that can still be a cycle for all of us, right? And, you know, I'm still 11 years later, still trying to navigate what it is, because, you know, different life situations happen, different life circumstances happen, different seasons happen, right? Different times of day happen. There's different workloads, there's different pressures.
We're complex beings. We're complex beings, right?
And life as a whole, right? And everything that we do. And I'm still having to navigate some of those changes on a regular basis, right? Because I think I've, you know, even this year, right, I've made maybe the mistake, but I like genuinely thought I had like this well-being stuff nailed, right? I knew everything that I was doing. And then the clocks changed in October. The week before that, I was away. I didn't sleep properly. And, you know, over the last few weeks, it's really, really aggravated one of my conditions. And I've really had to change a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, because I have been really struggling, right? I have been in immense amounts of pain and really struggling. And then when one of my conditions is kind of irritated and aggravated, that has a knock-on effect on everything else that I'm living with. And I genuinely thought a few months ago that like I'd got this stuff nailed now, right? I was doing all this stuff. I was feeling great. I was doing all this stuff. 1 week without the proper sleep, because I was away and I wasn't sleeping properly. My morning routine had been broken throughout that week. Clocks changed when I got back to the UK a week later. Within a couple of days, like my body was screaming at me. Like I still do not have all of the answers to this, but again, I'm recognizing that it's cyclical, that I have to continue to change things, that I have to be, constantly paying attention to what I need, right? There is no one and done, right? None of us can, walk into the gym tomorrow and push ourselves to the limit and walk out with like bodybuilder physique, right? None of us can go for one run and all of a sudden we're a marathon runner. None of us can drink one glass of water and be like, oh, I'm the most hydrated person in the world, right? There's no one and done to this stuff. It needs to be constant. And just as we push ourselves constantly, we have to be constantly, what do I need today, right? That has been my biggest learning over the years, right? Every morning,
it's a good question.
Part of my journaling or my meditation, I'm tuning into what is it that I need. I'm also paying attention to that at lunchtime, right? At lunchtime, what do I need? Do I need a walk? Do I need to just sit? Do I need to eat something slightly different, right? I'm asking myself that question now repeatedly every day, but that's my question. What do I need? And that is really getting me to pay more attention to everything, right? Mentally, emotionally, physically, socially, psychologically. That one question is really, really transforming everything for me in terms of food, nutrition, sleep, hydration, social activities, work, everything, right? What do I need? And actually almost kind of trying to get my head out of that, right? Really feeling into that answer. So that, I suppose, that brings us back to the kind of woo that we started in earlier. But what do I need? And that I'm making sure that as much as possible, I'm giving myself what I need in that moment on that day. And that for me is what's like becoming the biggest game changer.
It's really powerful, is that, isn't it? That kind of internal reflection and that question to kind of challenge yourself about what do you need for that day. I think it's a really important question to be asking yourself, is that, and I guess it's that kind of what are your trade-offs as well? So what are you saying no to as well as what you're saying yes to, isn't it? It's kind of achieving that balance constantly and not kind of saying, well, I can take it all on. Actually being able to say, well, no, that's actually, if I ask myself, what do I need? Well, if I take that on, that's going to adversely affect me. So yes, I can do that, but the consequences of this are going to be X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah, totally. And very often the payoff is not worth it, right? We think it is. Again, even if I look at my diary for this week, I every Sunday I will sit and look at my diary for the week, and I've kind of really sat and looked at it. This, there should have been things in the diary for this week, and I've looked at, actually, is that going to help me this week? Right? Is that going to serve me? What difference is it going to make? I've got a big week next week. I've got a big keynote at an event. I've got my book launch next week. And again, that's the payoff. Thank you. But like that's the payoff, right? Am I prepared to push myself to the limit this week, knowing that I would go into the weekend absolutely exhausted, and that potentially there might be a knock-on effect next week? Or am I prepared to actually, as much as I would love to do that thing this week, I don't need to do it, and I'm not prepared to push myself to the limit for it. And this week, thankfully, it's not necessarily kind of client, it's not client work. There are some things that I've just had to say no to, because it's not worth a long-term consequence on my health or my time or my energy or my focus. And I know that I need to be my very best self next week. And so this week I've had to ask some questions, and, even some amazing stuff that I've been looking forward to for months isn't happening, because it's just not worth the consequence. It's not worth the effort.
No, the trade-off's not going to be worth the impact, right?
Not at all.
Yeah. And again, it's a really, and that's a really challenging thing, isn't it? To kind of do that self-introspective reflection and ask yourself those tough questions. What are you prepared to let go? As well as what you're prepared to do.
If we're aligned to our values, right? If I know, like, integrity for me, and we talk about integrity, right? Lots of people will talk about integrity and not do it, right? Integrity for me, and it's the definition of it, right? But actually, like, it's doing the right thing even when nobody's looking, right? That for me is integrity. That is aligned to my values and my mission and my purpose and everything, as we've kind of said, right? Banishing burnout and solving the burnout equation. Now, I can, for the sake of Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, right? I can push myself and go to these events this week, and I can snap a few selfies, and I could be like, look at me on I Amazing, and suffer the consequences next week. Or I can ask the question, what do I need? And right, is this aligned to my values? And actually taking a few pictures for Instagram is not worth me jeopardizing my values for. And it's not worth me compromising my health for. And actually it goes against my entire mission of banishing burnout and solving the burnout equation. So for me, every single thing that I do comes back to that. And that's social stuff as well. I will say no to social stuff. I will say no to doing stuff with my partner. I will say no to doing stuff with my parents. If I do not have it in the tank, I don't push myself anymore. Whereas again, even a few years ago, I would have been too worried about what my partner might say. I'd have been too worried about what the people at the other events might say. I might be too worried about my parents, what they might say. I might be too worried about what my sons might say. I might be, really worried that I'd get, kind of FOMO of not being in the event and not being in the pictures and everybody thinking I'm really boring. I don't care anymore, right? There is one of me. I have a finite amount of energy. I have a finite amount of health. I know what it feels like to become seriously ill as a result of burnout. I know what it feels like to almost die as a result of burnout. And I will never, ever, ever get to burnout number 3 because I will not compromise myself anymore. And I don't care. And I say this as a deeply caring person, right? I'm a very caring, empathic, compassionate, loving, awesome person, but I'm not going to go to an event just because you might be a little bit upset if I say no, right? That's not worth it for me. My health, my boundaries, my non-negotiables, my mission, my values, that for me is what's important. And if it means I don't get included in a few selfies, I don't get included in a few selfies. I would much rather be able to share my story and say I chose myself over that particular thing, and I know I've done the right thing.
It's a strong message around boundaries, right? That's what I'm hearing all throughout this golden thread throughout our conversation this afternoon, Kelly, is the importance of setting healthy boundaries for yourself and for others as well. So you can maintain.
Yeah, totally. But I'd even take the boundaries one step further. I used to talk a lot about boundaries. And I realized actually when it comes to boundaries, many of us will almost like bend and flex our boundaries, right? But also other people bend and flex them, right? You've mentioned kids, I've mentioned kids, right? Kids push boundaries,
Absolutely.
right? Family push boundaries, friends push boundaries, clients want to push boundaries. And sometimes we flex them. And I stopped talking about boundaries as boundaries and started calling them non-negotiables. And that, I don't know if it was something shifted. I don't know if that was just mentally for me or if other people were hearing it. But if you say to me, oh, Kelly, can you do this? I'm like, oh no, I've got boundary around that. Your natural instinct, right, is to try and push against that boundary. Because if I'm going to stand in my boundary, right, if I'm going to stand in my boundary, you want to push it. If me standing in my boundary doesn't get you what you want, right? So you're like, oh, come on, Kelly, like just this once, could you just do this thing? And then I go, do you know what? Yeah, it's just a one-off. Okay, I'll do it. But if you say, Kelly, can you do this thing? And I say, no, it's for me, it's a non-negotiable. Like for me, that's a conversation ender, right? There's nothing that you, because I've said this is a non-negotiable. There's nowhere for you to push with it. And I just recognize that just that change in words really shifted for me kind of mindset, but also shifted what that conversation looks like between me and other people. Boundaries you want to push against because ultimately you want what you want and you expect me to flex my boundary for you. But actually, when you understand it's a non-negotiable, you understand that's a hard line and we need to find something. We need to find a different way around it. And so I think that's just made a huge difference for kind of everything that I do and all of the conversations that I have. I
really like that. I really like that reframing of the language there, because you are really you're drawing a line in the sand, right? And you're saying, this is me. This is what I'm not prepared to go past with people. And I think people prefer that directness, that honesty. Might not always like it, might not always accept it, and you might lose a few people on the way, right?
Totally. But then they're not my people, right? They're not your people.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. I really love that reframe, by the way. And I'm just mindful of time, Kelly, and really grateful that you've given up your time, by the way, and that you've kind of said yes to coming here and talking to me. And
you're very welcome. You've probably guessed by now, Mike, I can talk till I'm blue in the face about this stuff.
And this is why you're here. I'm really grateful that you're doing that as well. And I just thought it'd be remiss of me given the nature of kind of the conversations that I have with people as well, not to bring into this conversation neurodiversity when we're
Yeah.
talking about burnout
Yeah.
as well. And early on in the conversation, you talked about how not being able to be your authentic self and be you is a really big contributing factor towards
Yeah.
burnout as well. But for a lot of neurodivergent people, that's just not possible. You know, you may be familiar with the term masking, and a lot of us kind of mask to be able to fit into the societal definition of whatever normal is.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of energy and impact on our mental health. And as you're probably aware from all the study and academic work that you do, neurodivergent people are much more susceptible and at risk of poor mental health as a result of all these extra contributing factors and challenges that we have to deal with in order to be able to fit in to that kind of societal description of whatever normal is. So I wonder, kind of, you know, have you seen what are your thoughts around kind of then for neurodivergent folks? And I'll give you an example of myself, who kind of, you know, regularly kind of have that, not flirtation, but kind of feel that impact of burnout from all these additional kind of spinning plates that are going on all any one time and every single day. And you talked about kind of those that the impact of doing things as well. So for me, you know, I went along to a big conference the other week and I was a speaker, but it took me 2 days to recover from that, and I gradually gave myself some time to be able to do that. Also, you know, I'm a privileged position, I guess, in terms of I can do that. Not everyone is. So I wonder how then we are able to better support people across a much more wider intersection of society where burnout can be a thing for them, but it's not always that apparent or visible that they may be suffering from these things, and they've learned how to be able to hide a lot of that and not be their authentic selves in the workplace or kind of running a business or whatever. You know, they're having to kind of mask and be someone else. How can we support people? What can we do then to support people, neurodivergent folks who are experiencing this but who could be much more susceptible and alive to burnout?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things to kind of unpick there. I think the first, for anybody that feels that they have to mask, they are absolutely going to be more susceptible to burnout, full stop, right? So whether that's because of invisible disabilities, whether that's because of neurodivergence, whether that's because you feel you have to, you know, change, I don't know, how you dress or how you talk or how you look or where you're from or religion or, you know, sexuality, sexual preference, whether it's anything, right? Any situation where you feel that you are unable, or whether you know you don't feel it's safe for you to be able to be yourself, any form of masking itself takes time and energy and focus and attention. And if you are already kind of running on empty, or you're, you know, always kind of full, the additional energy that it takes to mask, to try to show up differently, you know, to present in a certain way that is seen to be acceptable or normal, or any of that kind of stuff, right, is going to take additional energy. And I'll come back to the burnout equation, right? Toxicity minus sense of self equals burnout. And you know, in my last book, when, you know, and a lot of the work that I did there about kind of mind the gap, right? The gap between who we really are and who we feel we need to present as, or who we need to live as, the bigger the gap, right, between who we are and who we need to live at, the bigger the gap there is for burnout to fill.
Yeah.
And so, like, to what extent are we masking? To what extent are we, you know, dealing with those sorts of things? I'm the same when it comes to events, and that's one of the reasons why I charge as much as I charge for speaking events, because actually it's not, you know, preparation doesn't, you know, is no time at all for me. But, you know, once, if I'm up on stage, or even sometimes if I've just, you know, I've been asked to be at an event all day, I might only be on stage for half an hour. But that I also, throughout the course of the day, will get people coming up to me constantly, right? I'm at an event next week. I don't know how many messages I've had from people like, I can't wait to chat with you during the break. That's going to be, that in itself is going to be a lot for me. I will be, and those that run the conference know that during the breaks, I am not going to be accessible to anybody, because I will not have energy to have 10,000 conversations with 10,000 people when I need space to recharge, right? I know there is a space for me to go and get what I need. I know there is space for me to be able to recharge. And I know, you know, where I will be sat in the room so that I'm not picking up on everybody's energy all day, every day. But I also know it will take me at least 2 days to recover from that. And again, with some of the work that I do, you know, and some of the speaking gigs that I do, right? You're paying not only for my expertise on when I'm on the stage, but you're also paying for my downtime afterwards. Because if I'm going to show up and give what I do, give the energy and everything that I do on the stage, and if you want me to stay even longer throughout, you know, there was an event that I did a couple of months ago, like, can you do it? And then it was, you know, if you could stay all day and maybe do a panel discussion later, like, you're paying for that. If you want me up on stage twice, there's a cost for that, right? Because that's going to take even more out of me afterwards. And, you know, I talked about some of the things that I live with. So, you know, as a result of my two periods of burnout, so I live with bipolar, I live with Crohn's, and I live with endometriosis. All three of those can have a huge impact on my mental health, and all three of those can have an impact on me physically. So my physical, emotional, and mental health can be really, really exacerbated as a result of those three things.
Yes.
I have also then had a diagnosis of ADHD and autism. And
congratulations.
Thanks. But like, managing all of that for me, right? I don't tend to talk about any of my conditions. I don't tend to talk about my neurodivergence, and not because I'm masking, not because I want to mask, not because I don't want to have those conversations, but actually for me, like, I want to be able to show up as me, right? You get me as I am. And again, I recognize that not everybody is able to do this in the way that I can or will, or potentially how other people will. But actually, if I'm asking for something, if I'm asking for a quiet space for breaks, if I'm asking for additional money because it's going to take me 2 days to come down, I don't talk about I need this because of my conditions, right? It's just, this is it, right? This is my non-negotiable. And that's how I talk about it. And that's how I set the scene. Some others may not be able to do that. Some others may not be in a position to be able to do that. And again, I suppose my starting point is like, why do you not feel able to? And if it is because it's a psychologically unsafe environment, if it is because it is a toxic environment, then I think that is a different question. I am able to ask for what I want and need with anybody, right? Whether that's family, whether that's friends, whether that's clients, whether that's, you know, colleagues, you know, work peers, work colleagues, events, everything. That's my non-negotiable. And you might not agree with that, and that's fine. And you might not choose to pay me for that, and that's fine. But these are my non-negotiables, right? These are the terms on which I work with you. These are the terms in which the things that I want. This is how I manage my time. This is how I manage my diary. This is how I manage my energy. And again, if you're not on board with that, or you want extra from me, then you've got to pay for the extra that you're going to take from me. And you know, I think anywhere where there's masking, specifically neurodivergence, to your question, right? Yes, you are going to be more susceptible to burnout. And burnout may then make you more susceptible to neurodivergence. And it may have been something that has always been hiding. It may be something that, you know, hasn't been diagnosed. It may be something that has been created or developed later on, again, as a result of the high stress, right? As a result of the changes to the brain.
Acquired neurodivergence.
Right. And as a result of, you know, the stress and the trauma and everything that burnout creates on the brain. Right.
Thank you for bringing that up, by the way, because we don't talk about that enough.
Yeah. You know, it changes our wiring. And so I think, you know, it's everybody's got to be mindful of all of that. But again, you know, there are so much invisible stuff, right? The chronic illnesses that I will still get, well, you know, but you look all right. Well, like, whatever. Right.
What does that even mean? Right?
And I'm kind of past the point of having to explain that I'm not, you know, but what I have done, which has been a game changer for me, because I can still push myself to the limit with some things. And I still know that I can recover. Again, I've made some big changes this year. I've made some big changes over the last couple of years. But like I recently bought as like an app and a wearable device that I now wear, a company called Visible, and actually that gives me like pace points. So based on based on what's going on for me, like on a visceral physical level, I now get like pace points every single day. And I get alerts that will tell me, like my alert today, I'm well over my pace points for today. Like at 12 o'clock today, it was like, you've exceeded your pace points. And I knew that this afternoon I had 4 conversations. I hadn't even really started like the work. I'd done a couple of calls this morning, but like these conversations were all part of that. So I know today I'm well over my pace points. I know I'm starting to feel that now. I've already spoken to my partner and messaged him about what I need this evening. I've already messaged my sons about what I need this evening. And I've already made some changes to tomorrow morning because I know that I will be feeling the effects. And even if I don't feel the effects, actually, I don't need to push myself to get to that point. And I think all of us should, I know this is not, it doesn't feel possible for all of us, but every single one of us should be able to ask for what we want and need. And that should be the non-negotiable, right? That is absolutely what should be the non-negotiable. And whether that's in our families, our friendships, our workplaces, our businesses, whatever, my clients know that if I need to change something, it is because of the health conditions that I work with. Very, very, very rarely will I cancel client stuff because I will manage my energy around it. And if it means I don't do a podcast this week, or I don't do a blog, or I don't do a particular thing, again, it doesn't happen, right? The non-negotiable stuff from a work perspective for me is the client stuff. Everything else can fall by the wayside, or I can delegate it, or I can get some additional support. But I know every single one of my clients, my family, my friends, whatever I need, I will get it. Because I set the boundaries to say, this is what I need. And I want all of us, every single person, to be able to have the confidence and courage to be able to say, this is what I need. And for us to know that we are in a safe enough space for us to get it. Because I think that's where we start to create it, right? From my perspective, we have well-being and burnout, again, like it's on another scale, right? Everything we are doing on this scale is either taking us towards well-being or it is taking us towards burnout. Well-being and burnout are the consequence of everything that we do, right? It's not tick boxes, it's not initiatives. We're either moving towards well-being or we're moving towards burnout. And if we're having to mask or hide or not be ourselves or shrink or, you know, be uncomfortable to try and make other people comfortable or any of that kind of stuff, every single one of those things is going to have a knock-on effect that takes us more towards burnout. And I want all of us to be able to make empowering decisions for ourselves, every single one of us, right? Know who we are and be able to take those steps and ask for what we need to move us towards well-being. Because every time we hide ourselves, mask ourselves, shrink, don't ask for what we want, don't set those non-negotiables, we're moving one step further to burnout. And I think, you know, like that's how we get to the point of prevention. Right? It's when we are in a space where we can say, this is what I need, and it's a non-negotiable.
Yeah. Who am I? What do I need? What are my non-negotiables?
Yeah.
I love it. We've literally pretty much got right to the end of the podcast.
And I can still keep going.
on honestly, I think you this conversation could probably go on for about 3 hours, but I'm really mindful, obviously, of your non-negotiables as well, in that you need some decompress. You need to kind of get your stuff on, doing your stuff, and you know, make those things happen that you need to happen. So you've got that energy. Again, I'm always too acutely aware of kind of energy levels going up and down, that kind of spiky energy profile as well. But I'm really grateful for everything that you've shared and for being so open and authentic. Really has. I've really kind of enjoyed listening to you and reflected myself on a lot of things that I do that aren't healthy as well, and some of the things that I can do for myself as well as for others as well, and also listening to that reframing the language as well around boundaries. I think that were a big key jump out moment for me that I'm going to reflect on as well. So, you know, just because I'm hosting this conversation, it doesn't mean that I'm not reflecting and learning as we're talking as well. It's a two-way process as well. You know, I'm a deep thinker, I'm a deep reflector as well. So I always love it when a guest comes on, is so open and authentic, and I'm just like a sponge absorbing it all and thinking, wow, this is great. I'm going to reflect on this afterwards as well. And what can I do
Yeah.
What can I do? What are my non-negotiables? Who am I? I'm going to start asking myself those questions.
There you go.
As
Enjoy
well, so
it. Enjoy it. Hopefully you
thank
get
you.
some fabulousness from it.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure that will really resonate and be of benefit to many listeners who've
You
joined
are
us as
very
well
welcome.
today. So thank you for joining us, Kelly. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to talking to you more after this as well at some point, after you've recharged your own energy levels as well. And yeah, whatever you're up to, I'm sure it'll be awesome. You're awesome. And thanks for joining us today. And yeah, have a good rest of the week.
And you, thank you. And thanks again for the invite.
You're very welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you.